Generation 1. If you're like me, chances are you've watched a lot of content on these games, whether that's speedruns, solo runs, or through the countless videos documenting all the weird glitches and bugs these games brought with them. And while the original 151 Pokémon will always hold a special place in our hearts, the unfortunate truth is that Generation 1 didn't give all these Pokémon a fair and fighting chance in their debut. In fact, there's a few Pokémon that, quite frankly, you shouldn't use at all. Today, I'll be going over some of those Pokémon and tell you why, in my opinion, they are some of the worst Gen 1 Pokémon. But what exactly do I mean when I say worst Gen 1 Pokémon? I mean, I could just pull up the list of Pokémon with the lowest base stat total and call it a day, right? Yeah, that wouldn't be very interesting. Instead, I've looked through all of Gen 1 to see which Pokémon are simply not worth using based on either stats, moves, in-game locations, and so on. Some may be bad because better options are available, and some may just be bad in general. To avoid potentially over-explaining myself here, I'll just get started with the Pokémon that inspired the idea for this list, Pidgeot. Like a lot of people, I'm a big fan of the regional birds, and I always try to use one on a brand new playthrough. And I'll admit, Pidgeot isn't the worst bird we've had. Unfortunately, it gets overshadowed by another one, that being Fearow. Looking at their stats, while Pidgeot is bulkier overall, that's really where its positives stop. Fearow is not only faster, but it hits harder. And this higher attack is even more important when you get into the moves. Fearow gets the powerful Drill Peck at level 34, meanwhile your first flying move for Pidgey is Wing Attack at level 28. And that's only if you don't evolve Pidgey, otherwise it's at level 31 when you have Pidgeotto. At least Spearow starts with Peck, which is incredibly helpful while you're waiting for Drill Peck. Oh, and I hope you like Wing Attack on the Pidgey line, because it's your only flying move by level up. Other than that, you're rocking with Gust and Quick Attack, both base 40 power moves. And you better get comfortable with base 40 power moves, because they are the strongest moves you will be getting through level up. It can't be all bad in the moves department though, right? Maybe Pidgeot gets a helpful status move that gives it the edge over Fearow? Maybe a helpful TM? Well, don't hold your breath, because the only moves Pidgeot gets that Fearow doesn't are Sand Attack, Whirlwind, and Reflect through TM. Their learn sets are otherwise identical. Pidgeot just doesn't have anything over Fearow outside of its slightly better defenses. I mean, you can obtain it earlier, but not by much. And if all you're able to use are normal moves between obtaining Pidgey and obtaining Spearow, you might as well just use Rattata for its better attack and speed. Spearow also evolves into Fearow at level 20, meanwhile you have to wait until level 18 just to get Pidgeotto, let alone level 36 for Pidgeot. And this level disparity is even worse when you realize that Fearow is in the medium fast EXP group, and that Pidgeot is in the medium slow group. On all accounts, there just isn't a reason to use Bird Jesus, as sad as it is to say. And the final nail in the coffin is that Fearow, the Pokemon I've been saying is better than Pidgeot, also gets overshadowed. If you're willing to hold off on a bird for the first part of the game, you can get Doduo and eventually Dodrio, who is faster than and hits harder than Fearow. Plus, it also gets Drill Peck and Tri Attack by level up. These factors just leave Pidgeot behind. Poor Pidgeot. At least it's still better than Farfetch'd. Next up on the list is a water type. As one of the most common types in the game, it's hard for all water types to stand out, especially when there's a 1 in 3 chance you chose Squirtle to start the game. At first, I went through the water types and realized that there are several that simply aren't worth going out of your way to get. However, upon reevaluation, I knew that there was only one that truly deserved to be called out as one of the worst on the generation, and that's Dewgong. While I could make comparisons to several water types to show Dewgong's inadequacy, there's one in particular that does this very well, and that's Lapras. At a glance, it's pretty easy to see why Lapras is objectively better. Stats-wise, Dewgong's only better stat is speed, which is only 10 points higher, which isn't a big difference considering the limited roster of Generation 1. Plus, with the better defense you get from Lapras, it means you're going to be taking hits much better than Dewgong anyways, so it's not the worst thing if it gets outsped. Looking at moves, it only gets worse. Dewgong may get an Ice move 3 levels before Lapras does, but unfortunately it gets Aurora Beam, while Lapras gets Ice Beam. And unless you want to wait until level 56 to get Ice Beam on Dewgong, you might as well get the TM from the Celadon department store anyways. Speaking of TMs, Lapras gets amazing coverage with Thunderbolt and Psychic, while Dewgong gets... Payday? Yup, Payday is the only TM that Dewgong gets that Lapras doesn't. Super helpful, I know. And after all that, I haven't gotten to the worst part. Dewgong and its pre-evolution seal are only available at the Seafoam Islands, which you need Surf to reach. So even before you can catch this water type for your team, you need another water type just to get to it. You know who'd be great for that? Lapras. Lapras is a gift Pokemon in the Sylph Company right next to the rival fight. So not only can you get it before Dewgong, but it's literally a gift. You don't even have to go out of your way for it. It's on the path to finishing the game already. And all this goes without saying that the Seafoam Islands are a completely optional area anyways. Dewgong is one of those Pokemon I've always wanted to like, but it seems like it was created for the purpose of being mediocre. Hell, even though I'm telling you not to use it, I doubt if anybody has ever used it outside of a randomizer. Dewgong is just truly worse Lapras. Next up, we have what should have been a rivalry, turned out to be a landslide victory. We have Hitmonchan versus Hitmonlee. Two Pokemon available for you to choose in the Fighting Dojo. Which one do you go with? If this were Generation 4 and beyond, this would be a different conversation. But unfortunately, there is no physical special split between moves yet, meaning that Hitmonchan is stuck as the worse option. As you probably know, Hitmonchan gets the elemental punches by level up, which are normally great coverage moves. That is, unless they're coming off a measly 35 base special. This is so laughably weak that it's better to use either a normal or fighting move in almost every situation. Oh, and speaking of fighting moves, Hitmonchan gets a whopping 1 by level up. At level 53, it gets Counter, which in Generation 1 only works if you were hit by a fighting or normal move. Meanwhile, Hitmonlee gets several great fighting moves by level up, and has better offensive stats to use these moves with. Yes, Hitmonchan has higher defense, but with a pitiful 50 base HP, I don't think that the difference in defense will really help all that much. And while Hitmonlee has the downside of not being able to hit ghosts, the only Generation 1 ghost types are in the Gengar line, and let's just say the elemental punches are a less than viable option against them. And if you're really worried about the shallow move pool of the two Hitmons, you might as well go with the Machoke. Even though you can't fully evolve it without trading, it has coverage moves in Earthquake and Rock Slide, better overall defenses, and just 5 less base attack than Hitmonchan. Look, I'm all for making the player choose between one of two Pokemon, but if there's a one choice that's objectively worse, why would you ever pick that one? Next, we'll take a look at the rock ground types available, being the Geodude line, the Rhyhorn line, and Onyx. And to my surprise, it's Onyx that ends up being really subpar. At a glance, you would think Onyx is better than the Geodude line, considering that you're stuck with a Graveler if you can't trade up to Golem. But even Geodude on its own is going to be doing more for you than Onyx in several ways. You can get Geodude as early as Mount Moon, meanwhile you have to wait until Rock Tunnel to get an Onyx. Plus, Onyx has a lower encounter rate and catch rate than Geodude, so you're likely to spend more time trying to get one. And when you look at its stats, Geodude alone has higher HP and attack, and the same special compared to Onyx. And when you get Graveler, that difference in HP ends up making Onyx's higher defense next to unnoticeable. So at that point, all you're left with on Onyx is higher speed. And that's nice, but what are you going to do with it? Bind the opponent to death? With base 45 attack? Unlikely. And Onyx doesn't look any better when compared to Rhyhorn either. Yet again, Onyx has the lower encounter and catch rates, but it's also caught 10 levels lower than Rhyhorn. And while yes, Onyx is available earlier, the only things to do between obtaining the two are the Rocket Game Corner, Pokemon Tower, and Snorlax. And if you use the Pokédog glitch on the Marowak, you can skip the Game Corner altogether. Making up that 10 level difference in that short span isn't worth your time. And when you look at their stats, Rhyhorn's high HP gives it physical defense almost as good as Onyx's, again, just like with Graveler. And with great attack and equal special, that leaves Onyx with its impressively average 70 base speed again. Yay! And if you look at Rhydon, yeah, Onyx doesn't stand a chance. And throughout all of this, besides the slow strategy of Bind, Onyx doesn't get any notable moves compared to either of these lines, whether through level up or TM. And so that leaves Onyx as being underwhelming and worst overall. This one particularly surprised me. I always assumed that Onyx was good enough to establish itself from the other two, but the more I looked into it, the more disappointing it looked. But hey, at least Onyx will always be impressive in the show, right? Ooh, okay, maybe not. Moving on. To finish off this list, I'll be talking about fire types. When you take the Charmander line out of the equation, there really aren't many fire types available to use in Gen 1. In fact, the only two available in both Red and Blue are the Ponyta line and Flareon. In the Pokemon community, there's a common sentiment that Flareon is just awful. Like straight garbage. But if I'm being honest, I think Ponyta is the worst of the two, by a significant margin. For one, you obtain Ponyta much later than every other fire type. Depending on which version you're playing, you can either obtain Growlithe or Vulpix as early as Route 7 and 8, as well as Eevee in Celadon City, while you have to wait all the way until Pokemon Mansion on Cinnabar Island to obtain Ponyta. Plus, you can evolve the prior 3 at any point with a Firestone, where you'd be waiting until level 40 to get Rapidash. Sure, you may miss out on Flamethrower on Growlithe or Vulpix if you evolve it too early, but that's better than not having the choice of Flamethrower at all. Neither Ponyta or Rapidash can learn Flamethrower in Generation 1. In fact, they're the only fire types who can't learn Flamethrower in Generation 1. That leaves you with Ember and Fire Spin for fire coverage, as well as Fire Blast, which every other fire type gets too. But let's be honest, why would you bother using Rapidash for fire type moves? That sounds like a dumb question, with it literally being a fire type, until you realize that Rapidash has the lowest special stat of all fully evolved fire types. Well, technically it's tied with Arcanine, but I'd be surprised if anybody would make the claim that Arcanine is worse than Rapidash. If you are, fight me in the comments. What this means is that a fire type move coming from Rapidash is worse than the same move coming from any other fully evolved fire type. So if you're not using Rapidash for fire moves, what do you use it for? The answer would be normal moves, since normal and fire are the only types of attacking moves Rapidash can get. And this leads me back to my earlier statement about how it's just better to go with Flareon. Flareon is in a similar position, also only getting fire and normal type moves, but at least it has the stats to use them. While yes, Rapidash has the speed advantage, I'll ask again like I did with Onyx, what are you doing with that speed? Personally, I'd rather take the 30-point advantage in both attack and special that Flareon provides, especially since Rapidash doesn't get any better moves than Flareon either. Overall, all these factors combined just make Rapidash a really underwhelming fire type. There's nothing it excels in over anything else, so why bother using it? Or hey, maybe your goal is to one-hit KO Horn Drill everything, in which case, Rapidash is the way to go. And there you have it. I'll always have a soft spot for the original 151 Pokemon, but that doesn't mean that some of them aren't just awful in their debut generation, with some still being subpar to this day. And to be honest, there are probably a few more that are equally as bad I could have thrown onto the list. If you have any ideas of other bad Pokemon, leave a comment and tell me why you think they're trash. Thanks for making it to the end of the video, and be sure to leave a like and subscribe for more content like this. I have a lot of ideas for future videos, and positive reception would be a great motivator going forward. Thanks for watching, and as always, for making it to the end of the video, here's a picture of my dog. Later.